This is Fraud to Fearless,
where we inspire dreamers to overcome imposter syndrome, embrace their authentic selves, and learn how to harness your brand to build a path to success.
I'm Brooke.
And I'm Hayden, and we're your hosts.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show, everybody. We're so excited. We have an amazing topic we're going to talk about today. It's one of the topics I'm the most passionate about, and I can't wait to see where this leads because I love talking about it with Hayden. We're going to be talking about how to define success, but before we dive in, let's get a really quick recap on the last meeting we had with our fearless leader, Joe.
Yeah, Brooke, I think it's important to reflect. We're going to do a lot of reflection on the pod, and this is a big milestone. This is our first ever guest on the pod, so let's take a few minutes and reflect. I know we shared closing thoughts in the episode, so if you missed it, go back and listen because I thought it was a really great episode. But Joe is an incredible leader. I worked with him when I finished grad school. He was my business leader, and we were partners together. And it was an incredible experience. It was a really difficult experience, but I think having Joe as my leader was essential, and it was a huge part of my transition and growth as an early professional. Some reflection from the episode one, Joe highlighted a lot about how at all levels of the organization, you can still feel this imposter syndrome. You can still feel like a fraud. From being a field service engineer at the beginning of his career to literally being a business president on multiple continents, leading 9-figure, $100+ million businesses and being a P&L leader. I don't think that's common knowledge. I don't think most people would think, oh, the person that's in that dream job also feels imposter syndrome at times. So I think that was a very big takeaway that I had, that it's not just when you're young or when you're an early career professional, it's your entire life. It's human nature. It's very common to feel this. And I loved that Joe was vulnerable with us and shared some of that and how it was consistent throughout his career, but how he built tools to overcome that. And with more experience, that really helped him. So another takeaway was he talked about ignorance is a threat or a powerful tool. And he talked about this idea of not having ego as a big leader. He said from 7 to 7:30, my door is going to be open. No meetings. My door is going to be open. Literally anybody can come in and talk to me. That's so powerful. In an earlier episode, we talked about walking your fences. That's an example of walking your fences at work, where you are giving access to people. And then it's on them. Right? Joe gave opportunity for individuals to come and discuss, and I thought that was really, really great. And I think the last thing is lateral moves are not bad. And I think generally a lot of my, peers and colleagues, generally everyone's very driven and they want to continue to move up in the organization. Everyone wants to make more money. Everyone wants that title. But I think it's important, and Joe highlighted this in his career, that his career trajectory wasn't straight up. He took lateral moves, and he went, and in some cases it was a different role. In some cases it was a different geography with a different culture. But he went and did something that was uncomfortable, and he was comfortable being uncomfortable at work, which ultimately helped him build this portfolio of experience that when it was time to interview for the big jobs, he had done so many different things that he was a very attractive candidate and got the job. So I thought it was a really powerful episode with some really good reflections. But Brooke, what were your reflections from the episode?
There was one clear message for me that literally changed probably the trajectory of this whole entire podcast of what he shared. And it was this: imposter syndrome isn't something to be afraid of. It's actually a gift. He reframed this in my mind to help me realize it's actually a little bit healthy to have this balance of I don't know everything, and that's okay. That's actually a tool that I can use to be successful. And his story is evidence of how he used it to become successful. So instead of trying to get away from imposter syndrome, I shouldn't have it, I should be X, Y, and Z, he took it, he used it, and look at who he became. So good.
It's a powerful reflection, not only that it happens to all folks at any level of the organization, but also that it's not a problem. It's actually a gift. And if we can harness it, if we can recognize it, harness it, and build some tools, that's a really powerful takeaway. Okay. Now on to the new episode content. So Brooke kicked us off. We're going to be talking about success and what that looks like. And really, I love this idea of defining it as, what is the standard in your life? And so, Brooke, why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about how we should think about success and what success looks like.
I'm going to start off with a story, Hayden. So I remember being in my very first job out of grad school. I was working for an amazing company, great people, and I really didn't like the work, if I'm being honest. I really didn't love the work that I was doing, but I was like, great company, great people, all things. While I was doing my job, I started to listen to this podcast. I can't even remember the name of the podcast now, but I was listening to it. It was one of those motivational ones that you could totally picture me listening to. And I would listen to this day in and day out. And it finally came to a point as I was listening to this podcast that I had to turn it off, because I said, I can't continue to listen to this and still stay doing what I'm doing. That created so much fear in my life. I was like, I can't. It felt like this disconnect inside of me and my mind, because I'm like, this is an amazing role. I literally just got 2 master's degrees at this amazing university. I'm working at the best, we can argue about that, but the best company, the best people work here. Why do I feel this internal disconnect of what I'm doing? I stopped listening to the podcast. Fast forward, I start talking to one of my mentors, and I think we all struggle with this idea of work-life balance and finding fulfillment and finding purpose. And this mentor, I want to get her on the pod because
let's do it.
She's amazing. I don't know if I've met anybody as incredible as her, but I said, listen, how do you do it? How do you find the balance of what should I do? And I feel like I'm working so hard in these different areas, but I'm failing in all of these things. And she just looked me in the eye and said, Brooke, what does success look like to you? And I stopped. And the first thing that came to my mind was this list of everything that's been fed to me. It's like, get an LDP straight out of grad school. That's what success looks like. Make X amount of money per year. Work your way up to this title in X amount of time. It was like, that's success. It was just like engraved into me. That was literally the first thing that popped into my head. So she said, are you thinking about what success looks like to you, or is it defined on what other people have said? And I'm like, she's reading my mind. She's literally reading my mind. And I didn't know what success looked like for me. And I thought, but my whole life I've been told, you're successful if you get straight A's. You're successful if you're captain of the team. You're successful if you're the president of whatever club. Really? Is it true? Those are big accomplishments. That's great. But why? Why is that what success looks like? So the question then becomes, is that really what success looks like for me, or what matters to me? Like, how do we figure that out? This was a breakthrough moment in my life.
I think the other thing that I've reflected on, because I have a similar story that I can share about my first day of the internship that I think there's some commonalities, but there are also some differences. So I can share that next. But we don't learn in school how to answer that question. There's not a class that tells you this is what life is going to look like and this is what success is going to look like. It's very tangible stuff. Like if you go get an internship, what success looks like is getting an offer. At the end of the day, that's number one. And then getting a job. But then from there, there's an unlimited amount of potential options of where you could take your career, your life, and it could look very different for a lot of folks. And so I think, again, we talk about the power of reflection and checking in, and I think your story really highlights that there was a key learning there, but you had to reflect to have this as a big takeaway, to have this as a defining moment in your career. Maybe just to close the loop, what did you end up saying was what success looked like for you on your internship in this story?
So it wasn't even necessarily about the job itself. One thing that I wanted to push back a little bit, even with what you said about internships, success looks like getting an offer. Okay, that may be true to a certain extent, but if the internship really didn't align with your values and you weren't passionate about the work, then would not getting an offer be a failure? Like, what actually matters?
Totally.
And so that's what's so intriguing, is being willing to push back on these boundaries that we've kind of set in our mind. For me, I realized that it wasn't just about title. It wasn't just about the money that I was making or the perception that I was giving off. I thought, I'm really purpose driven. Like, I want to be making an impact. Am I doing that? And if I'm not, then how do I change? So that was there was a list of things, but it really boiled down to some key things that I realized were more important to me than what I had defined it previously.
Yeah. And I think if you go back, one of our previous episodes was talking about brand and how brand drives what we do, how we spend our time. And I think even with what we just heard Brooke say, is it's a purpose-driven work. So I think there's some confidence and self-reflection there. And you got to give yourself permission to have to be brave. If you're going on an internship, and I think the natural assumption is, I need to get an offer. But if you recognize on that internship, to Brooke's point, that this is not aligned with my values, it's scary to say either I would not accept a full-time offer, or if I don't get one, that's okay, because that is not something, this is not aligned with who I am, with my brand, with my mission statement. There's some courage needed there. But ultimately, if you have that North Star, that this is where we're going, I don't know exactly the destination, but I know my brand and kind of what is super important to me. If you keep pursuing that and making that North Star drive your decisions, you'll get there. You'll get there eventually. You'll surround yourself with people that are similar, like-minded, and will help push you to get there. But you got to have that courage and bravery to give yourself permission to make some of those big decisions, which is challenging. It really is challenging. But I can share a similar story. It was interesting because, again, Brooke and I, when we were in grad school, we worked in the career advisory center where we gave hundreds of students resume, feedback, mock interviews, career coaching, etc. But on the internship, it's our turn. We're now the employee. We're now the intern. So it's like, we need the advice. We need the mentorship. And I think a good example that Brooke shared is she had a mentor that challenged her reflection on thinking about what success looked like. I was given a mentor, and we did not agree with what success looked like. So that's my story, which will be interesting follow-up to what Brooke shared. So I did a leadership development program, and the internship was essentially your audition. It was, if you do well, you get an offer, and that's your ticket to the dance. And we had current development program full-time employees mentor the interns. So my first day, I'm so excited. I'm trying to make a good impression, but I know nothing. I know nobody, don't even have a laptop yet. And I went and met with my mentor, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, Hayden, your internship is only 12 weeks. So just try not to mess up too bad and you'll get a full-time offer, but don't try too hard because no one's going to remember your name in 12 weeks. And that's hard, right? I mean, I literally went to grad school because I was passionate about pursuing a career in HR, hungry, driven. I was ready to knock it out of the park. And day one, it's like my balloon popped, it's like, oh, no one's going to remember you. And this was a person that was a mentor. He was very well respected, and I was excited for him to be my mentor. But I just remember hearing that and thinking, I'm going to prove you wrong. When I'm done, people will remember my name. And so I imagine we'll talk more about internship and career stuff. But to fast forward to the end, ended up getting a full-time offer. Me and my boss at the time, we still connect. He could definitely be a guest on this podcast at some point, but we had a really great relationship. We're still in contact today. And one of my business leaders that I worked with on the internship, he actually sent me a gift after my internship on my birthday. He saw my birthday on LinkedIn and he shipped me a book. And I remember thinking, I was like, he remembered my name. Not only did he remember my name, but he asked me for my address so he could send me a present. So I say that because mentors are really important in helping us understand what success looks like. But again, that North Star, I got feedback from a mentor that did not align with my North Star, and I gave myself permission to be like, nope, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Hayden, I love that story. And I think that it shows the reason why you were successful is because you did have some kind of North Star to be able to push up against, instead of just thinking, okay, well, maybe, I mean, like you said, you can consider it, but that was strong enough inside of you so that when you had the moment, you proved him wrong. I love that comeback story. And this whole idea of figuring out what success looks like for us, there's so many different ideas and philosophies on how to craft it, what to do. I've been reading this book lately, 10x is better than 2x. So good. Highly recommend it. But he outlines almost this section on what does success look like. And this was his take on it. He says that there's two different forms of freedom. The freedom from is the surface level. Because I have a job, I have freedom from poverty. I have freedom from maybe these really hard trials that I would go through without me being employed. And then there's this freedom too, which is more of the qualitative side of it. I love this part because he said, freedom too is the thing that changes everything, because it's when you actually take full ownership of your life. You choose your standard and you live your life based on that standard. But what does that take? It takes courage, because you're saying, I'm going to live according to this standard, regardless of the risk, regardless of the cost. I think that's what holds us back a lot of times when we're like, success looks like spending time with my family. Success looks like living a purpose-filled life. Success looks like being able to have flexibility with my time, my day. And then what comes in, it's these fears of, but you can't do that, or look at all these risks or the cost of you actually living that life. So if you can get to this point in your life freedom to, do you have the courage, regardless of the risk, regardless of the cost, actually live it? I don't know if I can 100% say that.
Yeah. I think it's a powerful lesson. I'm just Googling on the side some additional examples from freedom to versus freedom from. And it feels to me like freedom to is more reward driven and freedom from is more avoiding a negative connotation. So freedom from is my work-life balance is not great. So I want to reduce my current scope of duty so I can work less hours. Or I have a job, so that means that I can pay for groceries, to Brooke's point, and freedom from hunger, where freedom too is I'm empowering myself to make a difference on the world, so I'm going to go start a company. Or I am looking to share my life with somebody, so I'm going to give myself permission to go to that social mixer and talk to somebody, right, that I think is cute. I don't know. And that's a tricky dynamic to reflect on because in a big company environment, it's hard to not lean on freedom from instead of how can I really make an impact on what my role is. This is maybe not the best metaphor, but my wife and I really like this show on Bravo called Below Deck. And if you haven't watched it, it's an amazing show, but essentially it's these 100 million mega yachts, and the show is behind the scenes on how the staff completes these 3-day charters with these multimillionaires. And as the HR person watching this show, I get to see who's talented, who's not, who would be on my dream team. And then you watch enough seasons and I can select my dream team of the best employees. But what I would say is this freedom from and freedom to is so apparent in that show because the folks that do well and end up getting promoted and stay working with the captain are the ones that go above and beyond. They try to push the limits on what their job responsibilities are, and that's freedom too. They are allowing themselves to really make a difference and make the biggest impact they can in their role working on that boat instead of, I really don't want to get fired, so let me just try not to mess up. And I think it's a really powerful dynamic.
I love that example and the differences that you made. And honestly, this is the bold statement I want to make, that if you don't define success, life will define it for you. And the cost will always be too high. The cost will always be too high. So the question is, how do we define it? How do we define it, Hayden?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great transition. So we have 4 steps that we'll outline on if you've never thought about this before, if you don't really know what success looks like. One, you should definitely go listen to our brand episode because I think that's a great start. We've been strategic on what these episodes are, but cart before the horse, right? And really before you start thinking about success, I think it's super important to know your brand. So go back and listen to that episode if you haven't. But really this first step is thinking about what is important to you and just understanding your brand, understanding your values. So if you haven't done that, that's where you start. The second question is more of a reflection, and it's, are you living this? When you think about the big buckets of life, it's work, it's family, it's friends, it's hobbies, it's maybe school. Are you living that? Are you living your values and whatever you said was important to you? Are you able to do that in those 4 things? If the answer is no, the freedom from, freedom to thing is something you should definitely think about. I think too often, again, I really believe our world is a very freedom to world. But the folks that empower themselves to have this freedom from mindset, they're the ones that are starting these huge companies and making all this money. And I really think that there's something there. And I've never heard that before. So that freedom from, freedom to is really interesting. But the second step is, are you living this? Reflection. And if you're not, what's the gap? So step 3 is, what's the gap to get to, how can you include your values and mission statement more in those big buckets? So in that school, in that work, in that friends, family, etc. And then the last step is, what does success look like? So that full cycle, if you've never thought about this before, and it might be different. What success looks like in school could be different from work, could be different from friends or dating or family or etc. And you don't necessarily have to sit down. I mean, I wish everyone would sit down and do this in all aspects of their life, but you don't necessarily have to do that. But if you feel like you're struggling with one area in those big buckets, take 30 minutes. I feel like we don't spend enough time on self-improvement. It's like complaining about how much the gym costs. Who cares? If you go and you're getting healthier, go. Spend the money. Get a massage. I don't care. But if you're doing things to invest in yourself, you should do it. And so taking 30 minutes, an hour, and like listening to the brand episode, writing down and reflecting on your brand, finishing this episode, going through and writing down what success looks like and going through those 4 steps we just outlined, why not? Why would you not do that right now? It can only help you. It can only help you either identify a gap or an opportunity, or maybe you're completely missing something that's important to you and you just don't even recognize that it's not even included in your big buckets in life right now.
Maybe we can give a really high level example of what this might look like. So, for example, one of my values is having really deep connected relationships. Okay, so I value connection. That's one of my values. Step 1, know what's important to me. Do I understand my values? So I want to feel connected to people. Am I living this? There's definitely points in my life when I have not been living this. And I can see exactly where I was out of alignment because I didn't have the joy and happiness. Now, somebody else who doesn't have this value, they might be fine. That's why you can't define your success for your life based off of what Brooke says, Hayden, anybody else. But for me, that's important. So I recognize I really don't feel like I'm getting that connection in my job or maybe in my family. I want to be more connected to my family, to my coworkers, whatever that is. If that's what I want, what has to change? Is it possible? What can I do? We're not looking externally, like if this person did this or if my boss was a different way. What can I do? What's one small step I can make to foster connection in whatever aspect? And then defining, what does success look like? Does success look like other people trying to connect with me? Does it look like me doing everything in my power to create that in my life? Does it look like needing connection every day? Or I'm pretty good with a really good touch point once a week. I get to decide. I get to define it. And when I define it and it becomes clear, I see a clear path forward, then I am taking the ownership of my life. I'm not leaving it up to, oh, it's just like my team is horrible or that's just how my family is. No, this is a value that I have. It's important to me. I'm going to take ownership of it and I'm going to create that part of my life in the workplace, in my family. It's a game changer. And you can do these little experiments, this little process in any area. And it's a game changer.
Sounds like freedom 2 to me. I can give an example as well. I'll use this podcast. So my wife and I, we have a shared marriage mission statement, which is having positive impact on people's lives. And I think for me, I'm at my best when I get to be creative, innovative, no boundaries, white sheet of paper. When I'm trying to create something and there's not a playbook, just I like to cook. I hate following recipes. I need a general guide. Tell me 350 for 20 minutes and then let me go. And that's how I like to live life. Just give me the fundamentals and then let me have free reign to change whatever I want. And I am very passionate about helping people. And also, if me and Brooke being vulnerable and having guests on here that are going to be vulnerable and talk about, look, everyone feels imposter syndrome, but few talk about it. And we're trying to change that. But the reason we're trying to change that is to help that be in the light. Instead of all of us feeling this way and it's just weighing on us, but no one talks about it, by hearing more people talk about this, people will feel empowered to talk about it with their friends and family, and they won't be afraid to say that they feel like they're not going to do a good job. And so making this more common is a huge takeaway and something I'm very passionate about. In 6th grade, I was in bully prevention. I didn't bully anybody, but I literally stopped bullying. I wore the jacket. So it's like, I want to do that to all of us for ourselves, because in most cases, we're all hardest on ourselves. We're all bullies to ourselves in certain areas. And so I think this podcast is a great example of, like, I know my values, having positive impact on people's lives, helping people. If I can set an example from being vulnerable, and it's hard, it's awkward sometimes, but you do your best and you just move forward. Am I living this? I felt like I could live it more. I felt like I could have more impact on people's lives. I felt like I could have new avenues to be creative and innovative and have influence, and then teaching others how to talk about being vulnerable and this imposter syndrome. So am I living this? I think I could do it more. What has to change? Well, let's start a podcast, and then defining what success looks like. In a future episode, me and Brooke will share goals we have for the pod, but we are defining what success looks like for us. But it's not a destination. It's a journey that we're on together, and I think it's a very exciting one. So that's another real example of going through those 4 steps and then having the courage to change your reality if there's some opportunity for improvement there.
Yeah, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear in what ways you're going to start implementing this in your life, starting out with one thing that matters to you, just one small thing. And we'd love to hear the mindset change or the small adjustment that you're going to start making in your life to define what success looks like. Is it really, speaking to all my mompreneurs and moms out there, is it really making sure that everything's picked up before you go to bed? Is it really making sure that the kids are exactly in bed on time? How does this impact your life? We'd love to hear.
All right. So I've got 2 big takeaways, and then would love to have any that you have, but I'm stealing from your opening from Joe. But I think imposter syndrome is not a problem. It's actually a gift. I typed that because I thought that was an amazing quote. So great reflection from you. Imposter syndrome happens to all levels of leaders in the organization, regardless of experience, regardless of title. That was another thing. And then 2, I think this episode perfectly relates with what we talked about in brand. But now we're starting to get tangible. We're starting to be like, not just defining who we are, but now it's like, okay, how do you use that to make sure you're spending that time in your life? So 4 steps. 1, knowing what is important to you, understanding your values / your brand. 2, are you living this? 3, what has to change if you're not living this? And 4, what does success look like in that change? We both gave you an example of what that looks like for us, but I think taking those 4 steps, one call to action, if you will, is to Brooke's point, and those things that you're thinking about, use those 4 steps right now. Pick one aspect of life where maybe you're not fully satisfied and go through that exercise. It won't take very long, and I think you'll be very surprised at the impact it could have. What about you, Brooke?
I have one reflection item, and it's just even this deeper realization that success is so personal. It's so personal, and you get to define it. You get to define it, and when you do, life becomes yours to own. That's it.
I love it.
That's it.
You're the captain. You're the captain. Nobody else. You're the captain. Okay, true fraud to fearless. We're going to end every episode with Q&A so you all can get to know us better and also our guests. So, Brooke, my question for you is, mompreneur, 2 kids, how were you selfish and gave yourself some mom solo time?
You're totally calling me out, man. I know that you made me make this commitment. So you're calling me out. Okay, I'll tell you what. I did try to schedule a massage, but it didn't work out. But I watched a movie with my cousins and my family. I watched a movie. I was able to relax, had some great conversations with those that I loved. And that is so fulfilling to me. It's like I'm in heaven to be able to sit and just have a really good, deep conversation. And I wasn't doing laundry. I wasn't doing business stuff. I was just enjoying the moment.
That's awesome. Good for you.
Okay, Hayden, you said that you love cooking. You don't use a recipe. What was the last thing that you cooked?
Well, the last thing I cooked that I remember was my wife and I are expecting, and she had to do the glucose test. So I cooked no carbs because you drink the drink and then you take the glucose test. So no carbs. So I made scrambled eggs and maple sausage. But we needed the protein in there, but no carbs for the glucose test. So that was the last thing I remember cooking. Yeah, we're on fire. Great episode. I think I'm, to be honest, need to reflect on what we talked about, the freedom from and freedom to. But for now, thanks for listening. That's the pod.